Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Pickles and Vodka. I'm your host, Christina. It's Monday morning, and it's 7:15 a.m. I have to be at work in 2 hours, and I am snowed in. Like, as much as you can be snowed in Seattle. It's only like an inch or two, but it's crazy. Being from Chicago, I'm used to, lots and lots of snow. The second, you get wind of snow, the plows are out, but none of that's happening here. The streets are still covered and not a soul is out. And somehow I gotta get myself to work in a few hours, so that should be fun. I want to take the bus, but also I feel like it's gonna be even more unreliable than usual, and so I might just end up walking, enjoy the sights. It is really gorgeous out there, I will say that. Hope you guys are having a great Monday. I mentioned last week that I was dealing with some health insurance stuff. So basically, I work for a big company with lots of locations all over the country. And so when I moved here, I found a new location to transfer to. And my manager back in Virginia, basically, instead of transferring me, she accidentally terminated me. So I lost all of my benefits, got locked out of the system. The last month has just been spent trying to get all of that back. And it's just been one little inconvenience after another. And obviously the biggest way it's affected me has been losing my health insurance. And for a while it looked like I got it back, but then I had to contact my company to get me set up in this region because they had the wrong region listed. And it's just been a mess. And like I mentioned, I've been sick and unable to go to the doctor. And one thing that is really important to me now that I'm here established is finding a therapist so I can start addressing some of my mental health issues. Because I know this podcast isn't about recovery per se, but I am a huge advocate of self-betterment. And I do want, even if I'm not feeling recovery all the time, I do want to make some concrete steps towards getting better, whatever that means. So I got my insurance back, and then I have this psych evaluation scheduled for Wednesday. It's kind of scary, but I'm putting this out on the air for accountability so you guys know what's going on with me on a mental health level. With that said, I'm really excited about this episode because it's all about friendship, which has been weighing on my mind a lot throughout this recent chapter of my life. How to maintain the friendships you have, when to cut people out of your life, how to be a good friend, whether you're mentally ill or you are friends with someone who is. Thank you for everyone who wrote in with stories or questions. I want to give a special shout out to Diane, who literally messaged me while we were recording the episode, and I never got to see her message till later, but thanks for sending that in. She basically asked hold on, let me pull it up because I don't even remember because my life is a mess. Wow, I need to check my phone more. That's another thing I do when I am isolating. I don't check my phone, and the notifications just pile up. It gets more and more annoying. Anyway, she basically asked do you feel as though, for example, there are risks to befriending other addicts? In her case, she was an addict. She basically says, are there risks to befriending other people with similar issues because you're scared that your addictions will build up on each other? And while we didn't get to read her question, we do address what it's like when you are friends with people who are struggling in similar ways and what are the costs and benefits of that. So really excited to dive into it. Please keep sending me any questions you have or topics, ideas. I have a lot of great guests lined up for this month, as well as people who have reached out to me saying they want to be a guest, and it makes me so excited. I love you guys. Excited to see where this podcast will go this month. So on that note, I'm just going to jump right into my conversation with Katherine, my guest, and I hope you guys enjoy. Do you want to start by introducing yourself and giving a brief history of your mental health?
Sure. So I'm Katherine. I'm 24 years old, and I'm a student. I'm in grad school.
What are you studying?
And physics.
Whew. So you're one of those smart people, huh?
Not yet. I aspire to be smart someday.
I guess that's why you're getting your master's.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry for interrupting. Continue.
Oh, no worries. No worries. So, growing up, I think I struggled with some depression, not really diagnosed, but my mental health really started to become a presence in my life in college. That was when I went through my first serious bout of depression, and I was also dealing with some other kind of unhealthy habits. I really started to struggle with perfectionism and some kind of OCD-like symptoms. I don't want to say OCD because I haven't been diagnosed with that, but
Right.
but things like skin picking and just anxious habits.
Did it?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, was there something that brought that on? Or was it just like the transition into college, big life changes?
It was partially that. It was partially the transition into college, the stress of having more schoolwork to do, and also trying to come to terms with my sexual orientation and trying to come out, and all of that was
Gotcha.
also a lot of stress.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So it was a big time in my life.
Yeah, it's an understatement.
Yeah. And so when I was in college, I was very much a workaholic. That was how I dealt with my stress, by just pushing it all down and focusing on work very compulsively and taking far too many classes. And then when I got to grad school, I said, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to try to have a healthier balance. And that was a good decision, I think. But then I started having to find other coping mechanisms for my stress. So for a while, that turned into very much the other direction, into work avoidance. Picked up with the skin picking again, and that's something I still kind of struggle with. And then eventually I developed an eating disorder, which is kind of the latest iteration of my maladaptive coping mechanisms.
I feel like there's always something for people like us. Like you mentioned perfectionism and anxiety. I don't know. I've struggled with the same things, and I feel like no matter what coping mechanism it takes on, like there always has to be something.
Yeah. Because if you're not able to get to the root of that anxiety and that stress, it has to come out in some way or another.
Exactly. So, you said you're still dealing with stuff. Are you, in therapy or anything, or seeking treatment?
Yeah, I have a really great therapist who I've been seeing for a few years now, who has really been very helpful for me. And I am also in treatment for my eating disorder. I started treatment a few months ago when I realized that my physical health was just deteriorating pretty fast and really interfering with my ability to be productive in school.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm seeing a dietitian, and I have a meal plan. So that's been a real challenge and a lot of work.
Yeah, sounds scary as fuck.
Yeah, it is. It's, I wish that I could be all sunshine and rainbows and say, my life is so much more wonderful now that I'm in treatment. But in a lot of ways, it's kind of almost harder because it was a coping mechanism, and now I'm having to deal with everything that I was repressing before.
Exactly. It's not all sunshine and roses. Like, I'd say it's like braver to give it up because you're, facing life alone in a sense. Mm-hmm. Like, you don't have that security blanket. So,
yeah, exactly.
That's tough. So I wanted to focus this episode on the topic of friendships, specifically friendships when you have any kind of mental issue, like maintaining friendships. It's been on my mind a lot the last few weeks because, moving to a new state and losing the friends that I had, it's and then, going through my own mental issues, it's really shown me different sides of different friends. And it's really hard to have friendships when you're dealing with stuff. So I don't know, you said you had some experience with that. So do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I know how daunting it can be to try and maintain friendships and find friendships through moving, because I moved around several times as a kid. And so I think that made it hard for me to develop lasting friendships because, especially as a kid, it's hard to stay in touch with people when you move away.
Yeah, I don't know. You're just a few years younger than me, but I didn't have like a cell phone when I was a kid because I also moved around a lot. My dad was in the military, so like you're not gonna text people or be on Snapchat or what have you. That's what the kids are using these days, right?
I think so.
I don't know. I feel like we had fewer resources to keep up with friends when we were that age.
Yeah, it really is. And I think having that experience growing up kind of almost changed my viewpoint on friendships because I think I have this subconscious sense now that friendships are transient. They're something that comes and goes. And so I'm trying to work on being more intentional about developing friendships and putting effort into friendships so that they'll last, because I still find it easy to slide into that idea that, well, I don't really need to maintain these friendships because eventually I won't have to see these people again anyway.
Right. And I like the word you used, intentionalism. I don't know what you said exactly. Being intentional about friendships, because on one hand, people do come and go out of your life and sometimes you can't control it. And that is something you have to accept, I think. But also, like you said, you do have to be intentional about keeping people in your life because it takes a lot of work.
Yeah. I think intentional is kind of my word for this year. I'm going to try and be more intentional about everything in my life.
I love it.
I think that's something I could really stand to improve on.
For sure. So what are some ways you're doing that with the friendships you have now?
Well, I think a big part of it is to just, identify who my closest friends are and make sure to talk about the topic of, what we're going to do when, for example, when we graduate and we might not be living in the same place anymore, to really make sure that that's a topic of communication so that we have less chance of just drifting apart. I think if you're aware of a transition ahead of time, you can be more prepared for it.
For sure. And people do drift apart a lot. I hate it when that happens, but unfortunately that's pretty common.
Mm-hmm. And I think trying to figure out how the best way to phrase this, to work on setting aside time for friendships and to be, because, hanging out with friends spontaneously is great, and there's definitely a lot of space for that. But I think in order to really maintain a friendship, you can't rely on spontaneity all the time.
Yeah. Well, and it just becomes less realistic the older and more busier you get.
Exactly. And so I'm trying to be really mindful about not falling into the trap of relying on other people to schedule time to hang out, because, they're busy too and they, might forget. And I need to remember that if I want to foster my friendships, I need to reach out too.
For sure. Like, I struggle with the same thing. Like, starting in high school, like, I've always been really socially awkward. And so I would just always be like, oh, I'll have friends someday when people invite me to hang out. But it's not going to happen, unless you make it happen.
Yeah.
And what's the worst they're going to say, no? Like, I'm always afraid they'll think I'm, trying too hard or whatever. But I think if they're really someone that's good for you as a friend, they'll appreciate it.
Yeah, I can really relate to that. And I think, to tie this back into the topic of mental health, I think especially when you're someone that suffers from, depression or anxiety or what have you, it's especially important to proactively think about these things and think through the process of reaching out to friends and making plans and so on, because it's especially easy to fall into, illogical thought patterns that are the result of, the anxiety speaking rather than, the rational voice that wants what's best for you.
Yeah, for sure. I think that can hold you back a ton. Like, you might know that this person is interested in you and they'll say yes to hanging out, but your inner voice will be like, no, like, who are you kidding? They're just, gonna say no. But that's
Yeah,
definitely
no,
a
I
thing.
know it. I know exactly what you mean.
Another thing is just like making friends. Like, how do you even do that as an adult? That was one question I got a couple times is like, how do you make friends as an adult, especially if you have, mental health issues? How do you get over it, so to speak, and, initiate those hangouts or those conversations? Do you have any
Yeah.
stories about that from your personal experience?
Ooh, well, that's a tough question. I feel
Yeah.
like I'm not even sure I'm the best person to ask this question to because I've kind of always been in school and
Mm,
my social circle has usually been mostly made up of people I know from school.
that's right. You haven't
But
been thrown out there yet.
yeah,
It
I'm
ain't
graduating
fun.
soon and it's kind of terrifying.
Yeah, it sucks when you realize that you did have that huge circle of acquaintances like at your disposal and you didn't really in my case I feel like I didn't take advantage of it when I did go to school. And then I was out of school and I was like, shit, where is everybody?
Mm-hmm.
You definitely have to try
Yeah,
harder.
I do. I have been trying to widen my circle of friends lately, which is not easy. I think the internet can help in some ways.
Oh,
Um,
definitely.
so I do have friends that I met initially on the internet and eventually was able to hang out with in real life. A lot of them are in other cities, though. That's the blessing and the curse of the internet.
For sure. And I know there's a lot of differing thoughts about online friends, but I love having friends scattered everywhere. And again, moving around a lot. Each city I visit, there's a chance I know someone there.
Yeah, no, I think it's really fantastic to have friends in a lot of different places. That's something that I really value. But in terms of, finding friendships within my own city, I still do tend to rely pretty heavily on my social circle from school, which is that's definitely something that I'm still thinking a lot about. What am I going to do once I graduate and I don't have that safety net, as you said?
Yeah. Do you have like a plan in place? Like you said, you were kind of talking to your friends about drifting apart.
Yeah, well, I want to try really hard to maintain those friendships that I have now because I really value those and I don't want to lose them. And I've also been trying to get more into my hobbies lately, hoping that that's a way to meet more people.
Oh yeah, for
Uh,
sure. Hobbies are great. What kind of hobbies do you have?
my main one is knitting. I love knitting.
Cool. What do you knit?
All kinds of things. I tend to knit a lot of shawls. I really like doing shawls.
Do they?
Sweaters sometimes.
I feel like a sweater would be so hard to knit.
It depends on the pattern, really. It's actually not that hard to make a pretty simple sweater.
Have you met anyone through knitting so far? Or is that something you plan on like getting more into?
So I met people at my school through a school knitting group. People that weren't in my department who I probably wouldn't have known otherwise. But I'm hoping to get more involved. Yarn shops tend to have social events a lot of the time, and so I'm planning to get more involved in that, and hopefully meet people that way through community knitting circles and so on.
Do you find when you have the chance to go to events like that, your anxiety sometimes like prevents you from doing that?
Yeah, for sure. It can be very intimidating. It can be a lot easier to have that kind of avoidance feeling. The same impulse that makes me want to procrastinate on getting a task done if I don't feel like I'm ready to do it perfectly can also make me try to find excuses not to go to an event if I think, I'm not in my 100% best mood right now, so maybe I should just stay home. Or, they won't know me and I won't really belong. They'll think I'm an intruder into their little circle. And I know these thoughts are illogical, and so I try to counter them, but they can be very loud sometimes.
What other hobbies do you have?
Well, I also play an instrument. Yeah, I play the contrabass clarinet.
It's like you said, it's like a regular clarinet, but like bigger.
Yes.
right?
Yes.
What's how big is the band you play with? Like how many people?
It's fairly large. I would say it's about 75 people.
Oh man.
Hmm.
That's a lot of potential new friends right there.
Yeah, so that's been a really great experience. And I think the great thing about doing something that's very group oriented like that is I have a really good reason to be regular about going to rehearsals. Because if I don't go, then they're missing my part and then I'm letting people down.
Hmm.
And so even if I'm not really feeling like going, I have that strong motivation to show up. And then I'm always glad that I did, even if I was, even if before rehearsal I was feeling like, oh, I don't want to go to band today. By the end, I'm always glad that I went.
Yeah, for sure. I find that too, like when I force myself out of my comfort zone and do something that involves other people, I never regret it. Unless, I mean, it hasn't happened yet, knock on wood. But putting yourself out there to meet new people can be a good thing, I think. Especially
I
if it
agree.
involves your hobby.
Because then you automatically have something in common.
So going back to your childhood, I feel like we should talk more about your journey because we just kind of like brushed past it. Do you still keep up with any of the friends from back then?
Sadly, not as much as I wish I did. I still have a handful of people on Facebook who I knew in my childhood, but we're not really still regularly in touch. Actually, now you're kind of inspiring me to reach out to some of those people and reconnect.
Yeah, I think that's another way, another way to initiate stuff is like reaching out to old friends. We all like to shit on Facebook these days, but it can be a good tool for finding those people from your past, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not really a very avid user of Facebook, but I do think that it's really good to just stay connected to those old friends.
Yeah,
Sometimes
for
I
sure.
hear my parents' generation saying, you had to keep track of everybody's phone number whenever they changed it because if you didn't get that new phone number, they were lost to you forever. So I think it's good that that doesn't have to be the case anymore.
Did you find it easier to make friends when you were a kid? Or did you notice it getting harder, like, as you got older and your stuff started, like, your mental health stuff started coming up?
I think I had a hard time making friends as a kid because I just, I was kind of a misfit. I was kind of shy and nerdy, and I kind of, felt like I wasn't quite fitting in with the other kids. But I did find some friends, and, once I had those friends, it wasn't too hard to maintain those friendships, at least for a little while. It was nice as a kid to be, to eventually find the little circle of misfits that could all hang out together.
Yeah, exactly. But then you had to move.
Yeah, exactly. So I just kept having to do that several times.
Why did you move around so much
Just for my dad's job.
for your dad's job?
He works in video games, actually.
Oh, that's cool.
It sounds cool.
Until you have to move.
Until you have to move. Yeah, it's a volatile industry. It's full of a lot of small companies and startups that are sometimes successful and sometimes not so successful, and so that means that people end up having to change jobs fairly frequently.
Did you ever, like, resent him for it?
No. I think when I was a really young kid, I didn't have a very good understanding, I think, of exactly how employment worked and why we kept moving around. And then when I got a little older and was able to understand it more, I was able to see that it was hard on him too, and it wouldn't have been his first choice.
Yeah, I mean, he probably doesn't like moving around all the time either.
Yeah. So I think I ended up with some resentment towards that system, but not towards my dad.
That's good. So you mentioned coming out. Do you want to talk about that? Like how that journey has been?
Yeah. So I came out, I mean, coming out is a process. I started coming out in college, and I would say by the time I graduated from college, I was pretty much out to everybody. But it was a whole process. I think I was sort of a late bloomer, so I didn't even really start to come out to myself until my first and second year of college.
When did you first realize you were gay?
I would say when I was 16, but I was still kind of in denial about it then. It took a couple of years for me to really overcome that denial and come to terms with myself and be able to be okay with that. But for a while, it was very difficult, and I was struggling with a lot of depression and, self-loathing. And I dealt with it by throwing myself into my schoolwork, because if I was just constantly busy with classes and homework all the time, I didn't have to think about, these feelings that made me uncomfortable.
When did you finally start addressing them? You said in college?
Yeah. So in college, I dated a boy very briefly, and that experience just made me realize that I wasn't interested in men, and so I couldn't be in denial anymore.
Yeah.
I really had to face the facts. And so, I had my whole process of self-discovery, and I started, reading books and watching movies and TV that were themed around gay issues. And I think just, as I was able to internalize the idea that I wasn't alone, there was a community of people that would be there for me. And I didn't, have to just leap blindly into a life that I didn't understand how to live.
Right.
That was when I started to feel more okay.
Were you in a community, physically, that would support you, or did you feel like you couldn't talk to people about it?
I slowly started talking to a few people. My process of coming out was fairly slow. I confided in a few close friends first, and as I became more comfortable with the fact, I started telling more people. And then just after I graduated from college, I finally told my parents.
Oh, how did that go?
It was fine, actually. I think, I think my dad had already guessed that I was gay before I told him. My mom was surprised, but supportive. So I'm grateful that I had a family that would support me.
Yeah, that's really a gift.
Mm-hmm.
The first few friends you told, did they react to it?
I think they were surprised, but they were very kind and supportive as well. I really got lucky.
Yeah.
I didn't lose any close friendships or family members when I came out.
Yeah, I was going to ask, because I know, that's an issue for a lot of people when they do have that discussion about, their sexual orientation or gender or whatever, that can alienate a lot of people.
Yeah, I was very fortunate that didn't really happen to me.
Nice. So, do you have anything else you want to add about your own mental health journey, or notes on friendship in your life?
Well, I guess I would say that my friendships, especially in the last couple of years, have been a real source of support for me in dealing with mental health issues that have become, I guess I would say, somewhat more severe over the last couple of years than they were previously. But I do have, I've never been a person that has a huge social circle, but I do have some close friends right now, a few who have just been incredibly supportive to me. And I think there's a lot of value in finding friends that you can be honest with about what you're going through. Some of my close friends, also deal with their own issues and see therapists, and I really value being able to have those honest discussions, because I think it helps you to feel less alone. Ultimately, it's going to help our society to overcome the stigma about mental health issues if people are able to feel more comfortable being honest about what they're going through. Not necessarily with the whole wide world, but at least with the people close to us.
Yeah, if you can just be honest with one person, that's already a huge accomplishment. And I couldn't agree more, surrounding yourself with people you are comfortable with, that not necessarily have to have that in common with you, but it definitely helps. So what are your thoughts on toxic friendships? Because I know there's a fine line when you do surround yourself with people that have similar struggles to you. Sometimes you guys can rub off on each other, and it can kind of drag both of you down? Because that's happened to me, and I wanted to know. And it's like a very tricky thing to talk about.
It is. It is. I've definitely struggled at some points with friendships with people where the friendship got too intense. Like, mental health can kind of come and go in cycles. Sometimes you're doing better and sometimes you're not doing so well. And if you wind up both on kind of the downward part of that wave at the same time, it can really be kind of self-reinforcing and drag you both down.
Which sucks because, you know, it's not something you can exactly plan for.
Yeah. So I think it's definitely also important to be able to evaluate and recognize when a friendship is more draining than enriching you.
That's a good point.
And to be able to kind of, you know, mindfully disengage from some of those interactions. And I think the trick, again, to go back to that word intentional, is to be intentional about it and to be able to, you know, be honest with yourself that something is not healthy for you, and to be able to take a step back, not in a way that's going to be dramatic or blow up or, you know, cause a big falling out, but just in a way that's recognizing the needs of everybody involved.
What would that look like? Like, say you had a friend who struggles with the same thing you do, and, you know, you're both going through that downward spiral at the same time, and you need to step back, but it's someone you really care about, and you don't want it to blow up. You know, what would you do in that situation?
Well, I think really the only thing you can do is be gentle but honest and say, you know, I know you're going through a lot, and I really want to be there for you. But, you know, I think right now I don't have the capacity to provide all of the support that you need. You know, so maybe can we talk about ways that you can reach out to other people, maybe reach out to professionals to get the support that you need so that we can both thrive.
Yeah. And I think you do have to face the possibility, too, if they don't respond well to that, then maybe it's not a person you should have in your life right now, which is, you know, really, really hard.
Yeah, exactly. You do need to, you know, to be able to have boundaries. And if somebody doesn't respect your boundaries, then that's a red flag.
For sure. I kind of had that happen to me a few weeks ago. I kind of wanted to get someone's opinion on this because I think in that scenario, I was the person who didn't respond well. So, like, I had this friend, and we had known each other for years. We used to, like, get drunk together all the time and just shoot the shit. I hadn't planned on hanging out with them that night, but so I was, you know, drinking alone, and they texted me, and they were like, hey, you want to hang out? And I was like, sure. So we went and hung out, and apparently, like, they weren't expecting me to be drunk, and it really upset them. And they sent me, like, a text message a few days later saying, hey, you made me really uncomfortable. Just let me know in the future if you plan on being like that. Which, you know, is fair, right? And I texted them, you know, apologizing, but also saying, you know, I wasn't expecting to go out that day. And then I asked them out to lunch because I wanted to talk it out. You know, I don't want to talk about it over text. And then they just ghosted me, and I haven't heard from them again in weeks. And so I'm wondering, you know, am I the toxic person in that scenario? Like, if I've been asking myself, is there anything I could have done differently? Because it is hard when, like, mental health does not excuse shitty behavior. You know what I'm saying? Like, but also, if you are friends with someone who, you know, is experiencing, you know, addiction or depression or what have you, I'm not saying give them a pass. It's just kind of a tricky situation.
It is. And, you know, I think the fact that you're reflecting and being mindful and asking yourself these questions already says a lot, you know, about you as a person.
Yeah, I don't know. I want to reach out to them more, but also I feel like they're making the choice to like, maybe it's healthier for them to disengage with me, you know?
Yeah, that could be the case. And, you know, there could be other factors at play that you're not aware of, too. I guess that's
Yeah.
the thing about friendships is you can never know the whole story of what's going on in someone else's mind.
Yeah, and I guess sometimes, unless they choose to tell you, you're just never going to know, which just sucks.
Yeah.
And I do, like, I know we have a lot of advice for people with mental issues on, making friends, but I also want to talk about advice to give to people who are friends with mentally ill people. There's things to say and not to say,
Yeah.
I don't know. Does anything jump out to you that you wish you could tell people who are friends with you, or?
Yeah, I guess I would say to, I guess to reassure people that that if I seem to be going through a period where I seem to be withdrawn or less enthusiastic about things, that it's not that I don't like them anymore or don't want to be friends. It may just be that I'm, feeling overwhelmed or have a lot of other stuff going on, or I'm going through a period where my mental health isn't so good. And I don't feel like I'm up to the task of as much socializing, whether or not it's actually, necessarily a healthy decision for me to make to isolate myself.
And I was going to ask you that. I was going to ask you also, do you wish people reached out to you more when you are in those isolation periods? Or is it something you just need to like ride out?
I think I would say, I can't speak for other people because I think this is something that everybody would have their own individual opinion about.
Right.
I think for me personally, if people I'm not very close with seem to notice that I'm acting odd, that makes me feel self-conscious. But I do like it when my closest friends notice that I'm going through a hard time and reach out to me. That makes me feel safe and supported.
And it is hard to pick up the signs if you're not educated and if you don't know the person. And I think sometimes it's hard as the mentally ill person to communicate to people that this is why I'm acting this way. Because it's not something you can just bring up in conversation.
Yeah, exactly. It may be, you may be afraid of being judged or afraid of oversharing and making the other person uncomfortable. It's a difficult thing to bring up, and it's a difficult thing to know how to bring up, even if you know you want to.
Yeah, especially with newer people. Like, oh, it's so hard, like, making friends. Like, I mean, sometimes it's easy, like, making the initial acquaintance, but then it's hard once you're, like, in the different phases of friendship to know when to go to the next step.
Yeah, exactly. It's like that middle ground where, you're past the initial getting to know you phase, but you're not quite at the point where you're very close and you've developed that rapport already.
Like, what kind of advice can you offer someone who's trying to decide how much to disclose at what point with a new friendship? Because you don't want to scare someone away, but also I do think it is important to talk about these things.
Yeah.
For you, how have you approached it personally?
What I would say is maybe to bring up, mental health as a general topic of conversation, before getting into detail about your own history, to develop the friendship to the point where you can talk about those topics, talk about people see mental health professionals and the fact that these issues exist. And I think that can be a way to sort of test the waters and see where the other person stands on those topics. And to also develop your conversations naturally to a point where you can bring up topics like that.
That's really good advice, actually. Sometimes, like, when I tell people I have a podcast and they ask me what it's about, I say mental health, and so far the reactions have been, oh, cool, and then silence, or just nervous laughter. Like, it's not something, people don't really know what to say.
Yeah, exactly. Because there is that stigma, and even if they're not judging you, they may be feeling self-conscious that they'll say the wrong thing and make you feel judged, or, there's all kinds of factors.
Yeah, for sure. I got another message from someone, and I'm trying to think of how to work it in the conversation. It's about toxic relationships. So basically, like, one piece of advice she had is it's okay. Oh, yeah. I wanted to talk about cutting out people from your life. So we talked about, like, maintaining friendships and making friends, and losing friends, maybe. But I think one thing we haven't talked about is intentionally cutting people out from our lives. Have you had any experience with that?
Yeah, I've never had to cut someone out from my life entirely, but I can think of one person in particular who I've had to take a very large step back from. This is somebody who also struggles a lot with mental health, but is not very, intentional about working on the ways that impacts her life, and is not respectful of other people's boundaries, even when those boundaries are clearly articulated. So I think what I've had to do when dealing with this person is just, stating my boundaries in a way that's very clear. And then if she chooses not to respect them, then that helps me to not feel guilty about taking a step back, because I've very clearly stated what my needs are, and if that can't be respected, then the ball's not in my court anymore.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not even like things they're doing outrightly. Sometimes it's just a feeling you get around them. Like the story that was sent to me by a listener, she talked about this friend of hers and her boyfriend, and the three of them hung out all the time, and there were little things he did that were warning signs. Like, one time he got angry and, like, threw some car keys hard enough to dent the car, and they felt really uncomfortable, but they were like, whatever, it was a one-time thing. And then, they would all get drunk, and he would do really shitty things, like make out with someone else's girlfriend, and they kept thinking, oh, it's, he can do what he wants, he's not affecting us. But then, she ended up being assaulted by him, and it was, like, one of the worst things she's ever gone through. And there were so many warning signs, but they just kept him in their life. I don't know. Basically, she says it's important to realize that it's okay to cut out toxic friends, even if they didn't do anything to you specifically, because toxic behavior is not okay, however it comes. And though it's hard, sometimes you have to step back, even if it hasn't affected you. And then in parentheses, she puts yet.
Yeah.
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 And
I couldn't agree more.
It's so hard to cut people out, though. Like, for me, I hate confrontation, and I'm like you. I don't have a lot of friends. My social circle is very small. So the people that I do have, if for whatever reason I do need to cut one of them out, I feel really guilty about it. And I feel like I won't ever find any new friends.
Yeah, I definitely can understand that feeling. I think, it's like I struggle a lot with feeling guilty about, things that I really don't need to feel guilty about. I'm hoping that someday I can really internalize the idea that it's okay to protect my needs. That doesn't make me selfish. I like the phrase, you have to put on your own oxygen mask before helping others.
Oh yeah, that's really useful in the context of friendship too.
Mm-hmm.
Especially friendship with another person who's struggling.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, it's really important to remember that there's a difference between being selfish and hurting other people versus understanding what your genuine fundamental needs are and protecting yourself from situations that are going to prevent you getting those needs met.
Exactly. What are some ways you've been doing that lately?
A big one is, what we were talking about before, being able to recognize when you and another person are getting caught up in kind of a self-reinforcing spiral, and being able to take a step back. And also being able to be honest about, when you are or aren't able to provide emotional support to another person. I have a few close friendships where we do, where we are very honest with each other, and we provide ourselves with or provide each other with a lot of emotional support, which is really great, but you can't be your friend's therapist all the time. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And that's where I struggle the most too. It's like you want to be there for your friend all the time, but you can't.
Yeah. And so I think I've really been trying to work on being able to recognize when I'm not in a place where I can provide that kind of support, and, you know, and being able to be honest and say, hey, you know, I would love to be there for you, but, you know, right now I can't be everything that you need.
Yeah, it's so hard to say the words, but I think once you do, you'll find people are more understanding than you think. Like, I have a friend that's been really supportive throughout the years, and we've, you know, there's been times where we didn't talk as much because I tend to avoid people when I get depressed, and I mean, I have, like, maybe not lost friendships, but, like, weakened friendships as a result. And one day I just told her, like, hey, I'm sorry I haven't been checking my messages because I just didn't have the mental energy. And she understood, and it was fine. So I think people will understand if you are honest, like you said. Like, honesty is super important. But you do have to articulate that, and that can be hard for some people.
Yeah. And I think another area where honesty can be really important is eating disorders. For example, if you're struggling with an eating disorder, I've had to have conversations. You know, I haven't told a lot of people about my eating disorder because it feels like something that's kind of private that I don't want the whole world to know. Right. But I have had to say to a few of my close friends, hey, you know, I know a lot of our social life can revolve around food sometimes.
Sometimes.
Yeah. Or 100% of the time.
Yeah.
And so I want you to know that I'm going to do my best to participate in those things, but also if I'm not feeling up to that at some times, it's not personal.
That takes guts to say to someone, like, to, you know, even if it's a close friend, like, that can be hard. Did they react? Like, how did they react when you said that? Surprised,
but, you know, supportive. And I think, you know, when I told my two close friends about this, they didn't really know exactly what to say in response, but I followed it up with, I just wanted to put this out that, you know, I don't expect you to say anything specific, and I am getting help for it, so you don't need to worry about me. And then they said, well, you know, I'm glad that you're getting help, and let me know if there's anything that I can do to be supportive, which I thought was really nice.
That is really awesome. Do you feel like you were able to say that to them because you were in a place of seeking help?
Yes. When I was in the worst of my eating disorder, I didn't feel able to tell anybody about it. I felt as though I was, you know, I was very much caught up in my own mind and in my own world. And it was strange because I kept sort of expecting at some point that somebody would notice what was going on with me, but it's easy to have these, like, anxiety-fueled thoughts that everything you're doing is, you know, is so obvious to everybody, and there's some big neon sign flashing above your head saying, "Alert! This is a weirdo right here. Her life is a mess." Yes. But in reality, that's not really how it works.
Yeah, everyone's consumed with thoughts about themselves. Like, that's the brutal truth to it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's brutal because, you know, who doesn't want to be the center of attention? But also it's comforting to know that no one really gives a shit sometimes.
Yeah.
But it's just like we were talking about earlier with wanting friends to just approach you. Like, you're not taking the initiative, you're just waiting. It's like waiting for someone to notice how sick you are and ask if you're okay, but that never happens. And I don't know, like, when you were in that place, how did that affect your friendships?
Well, I was very much isolating myself during that time, because I was trying to avoid, you know, seeing food or being around food as much as possible. So that excluded me from a lot of social events. I was consumed with my eating disorder thoughts all of the time. My physical health was declining, and so I didn't feel that I had the energy to participate in, you know, the things that I would otherwise have liked to do. And so all of that had the effect of really isolating me from my wider social circle and also even from my close friends.
That's definitely one of the worst side effects to any mental illness is the isolation.
Mm-hmm.
Because it feeds into the whole disorder. Like,
yeah.
I mean, sure, there are people that are toxic and that can be detrimental to your mental health, but also it's good to be around people. Like, I have a goal of talking to one live person a day. You know,
that's really good.
It's like medicine, you know, human interaction. And yeah, I mean, online friends count too. I don't discount that. But there's just something about getting out into the world and talking just to a person, like even if it's like the cashier at a store.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't isolate. Yeah. That would be my advice. Like, even if you have to take baby steps to keep yourself from isolating.
I agree. I think that's maybe the number one thing to try and, you know, like if you're trying to work on self-improvement in the midst of dealing with mental health issues, that's definitely one of the most important things to be mindful about and things to work on is not to isolate yourself. You know, if you gotta fight one disordered thought, fight that one.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you said self-improvement. That's also really important. Like, you can't be a good friend. Like, you can go to all the events, you know, you can physically show up, but if you're not in a good place mentally, like, you're not going to be a good friend. And so I think it is worth it. You know, maybe you do need alone time to, you know, pursue a hobby or just recharge your batteries. I don't think that's the same as isolating per se.
Yeah. Isolating would be avoiding people specifically because, you know, because you're afraid of the interaction or because, you know, you have some specific ideas about what the event or the interaction will be like that you find unappealing or frightening because of those disordered thoughts.
Yeah.
Whereas recharging is, you know, it's putting on your oxygen mask. Yeah,
I totally agree. And like little things that can, you know, treat yourself or whatever.
Yeah.
It all adds up. Like, one thing that I like to do every week is like recommend something that has like brightened my life. And this week it's totally been plants.
Yeah.
I never really had plants before. I killed everything in sight. And so since moving here, I've been spending way too much money on plants and I just love it. It's like a hobby that has definitely improved my life. Not just growing them, but like eating them. I've been like cooking a lot more vegetables lately, like Brussels sprouts. Never had them growing up. And I discovered them like last week and I'm just obsessed. And
That's awesome.
Are you a vegan?
Yes.
Yeah. So how do you feel like that has affected your mood, if it has at all?
Well, you know, I think being vegan has been good for me, even if for no other reason than physically, not eating dairy helps me feel a lot better. I was in denial for a long time about being lactose intolerant, and then I finally had to cut out milk, and then eventually I went vegan. And I think feeling better physically as a result of that change also helps my mood. I definitely find that it's harder to be happy when you have a stomach ache.
Yeah. My cool thing to recommend would be, you know, buy yourself a little plant, maybe try a vegetable or something that you've been afraid of. Do you have anything cool you want to recommend, like a book or a podcast or something?
Yeah, sure. Last weekend? Yeah, last weekend I went on a ski trip with some friends and it was just really fantastic. We went out into the mountains and saw some beautiful views and did some skiing and got moving, and that was really great. So, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be skiing. I know not everybody, you know, lives near the mountains or anything, but what I would say is, you know, getting outside and getting moving can really wonders for your mood.
Especially if it's with other people.
Exactly. And it could be as simple as going for a walk around the park.
Yeah. I live next to a lake, and so I've been walking around it a couple times a week, and it really does make my day better.
Mm-hmm.
That's so great that you were able to do that with your friends. And like, I want to add on to everything else we've said. If you can find like a group activity to do that's physical and that's outside, that's a great way to make friends and also to take care of yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a win-win situation.
It really is.
Whew. Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. Well, thank you for making this podcast.
Oh, no problem. I'm glad that people care about what we have to say. I guess. I don't know if they really do care. Maybe no one's listening, but I enjoy it.
Yeah. Well, that's the most important thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. But I hope you have a great weekend.
Thanks. You too.
What are your weekend plans?
Oh, well, so I have this online Dungeons and Dragons group that I'm doing tomorrow.
Oh, nice.
I'm such a nerd.
No, I love it. I don't even play Dungeons and Dragons, but I have a friend who does. And do you know what Critical Role is?
I've heard of it. Is it like a TV show?
Yeah, it's just a bunch of voice actors playing Dungeons and Dragons together.
That's funny.
But yeah, I don't even play, and I watch that. So I kind of know what it is, but not really. Mm-hmm. But it's really cool.
Yeah. So I'm doing that tomorrow. And then other than that, I don't know, probably just errands, getting stuff done, cleaning up around the house.
Nice. That's like the perfect mixture of productive and fun.
It's the ideal weekend because you can feel like, you weren't totally lazy and you got something important done, but you also had a good time and, were able to enjoy
you talked to some people.
Exactly.
Well, I hope everyone else listening has a great week as well. This will come out on Monday. So, yeah, let's kick this week's ass.
Yes. Got this.
Bye.
Bye.